Good joy.
Yeah. Welcome to Soundcheck from Low 4 Studios in Manchester. I'm here with 5 guests to talk about the situation for music funding in the Northwest and beyond. And I'm going to hand over to each of them now to introduce themselves. So first on our right.
Hello, my name's Linda Begbie. I'm Chief Executive of Manchester Collective. We're based in East Manchester and try our hardest to disrupt the classical music establishment.
Thanks.
I'm Mary-Claire Daly. I'm Head of Culture at Greater Manchester Combined Authority. So I work with the 10 councils of Greater Manchester and our Mayor Andy Burnham on cultural policy and investment.
I'm Jonas Roberts. I'm the Senior Programme Manager at Bright Sound, looking after their arts development stuff, basically trying to get artists and music professionals paid and to have creative opportunities to mess about and have a good time.
I'm Jay Chambers, so I'm a touring musician, dub poet, general all-round creative.
Ollie?
Hi, I'm Ollie Wilson. I'm a co-director and founder of Beyond the Music, which is a new international music conference and festival that launched in Manchester last year, and we're back this October for our 2nd edition.
And I'm Alan Williams. I'm Professor of Collaborative Composition at the University of Salford. Well, it's been a tough time for the arts generally, including live music. This last year alone, 125 grassroots venues disappeared. Touring to the EU is extremely difficult and uneconomic post-Brexit. In my own cultural backyard, Arts Council England funding cuts have either ended or severely curtailed activities of my favourite people, SAFA, Oldham Coliseum, which has supported my own activities as a theatre musician, and Marsden Jazz Festival. The cost of living crisis has exerted huge pressures on venues and musicians just after the most traumatic effects of the COVID lockdown. But there are signs that national and local government are paying attention. The music industry as a whole contributed 4 billion in exports to the UK economy last year, and there's been limited support to assist grassroots venues. That's 5 million over 2 years from national government. A Department of Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee inquiry into the grassroots music scene began in January and will conclude later this year. Closer to home, the GMCA announced the Inspire funds earlier this year. I'm sure that Mary-Claire will talk about that. And Factory at Viva have been offering their Factory Sound scheme. So I'd like to ask everybody in turn now, do you agree with my initially downbeat assessment of the arts and music funding situation as it is, or are there grounds for optimism? So can we start with Ollie, please?
I think it's a mixed bag, to be honest. I think it depends on what kind of organisation you are, into like what kind of funding criteria you fit into and need. I think we're at a kind of bridging moment at the moment in terms of like the legacy funding models not really like working that well for the arts. I always think they're a bit too clumsy and not fast enough to respond at the pace that we need to move these days. And you know, I'm speaking about funding not just from a music perspective, but also I've run social enterprises the last few years, and ultimately we just found and generally find, you know, funding applications hard to do when you're in, you know, at the coalface of the business. I often find them quite restrictive. You know, we've got to change all the time doing what we're doing this day and age, and often like funding can lock you into doing certain things for so many years. I've always found that difficult. Long story short, like I think like the future of, not the future of funding, because there's great stuff going on, there's great pots and stuff available out there, but for me it's about bringing your audience into it. And you know, I want to say crowdfund, that's such like a bad word, there's a better way of putting it now, but like doing it a bit of a different way and bringing people in. So beyond the music, we're actually set up as a cooperative. You know, we're a not-for-profit, and we're here to make positive social impact in the music business, in music in Manchester. So people are getting behind us on our mission, and part of our funding mix is, you know, whilst we are applying to like the funds that we all know, we also have founding members, and we have 5 different categories of cooperative membership for people to sign up to. So it's a very mixed model to funding, and the way we're doing it is like super mixed way to funding at the moment. There's 5 different elements to the way that we make this work.
Thanks very much, Jay.
So I think from an artistic perspective, things are improving. They're not as bad as they once were. I think there were a few barriers though, like tying into what you were saying. I think the application process is one. Creatives generally express themselves through multiple mediums, and having a funding format which primarily is written based is massively culturally obstructive for people who are multidisciplinary and can express themselves through a medium of formats. I also think that when we're looking at funding, we also have to understand that there are barriers in place for different genres as well. For example, reggae is massively underrepresented despite the cultural heritage of it here in Manchester, as is hip hop and as is grime. There is more of a traditional trajectory of funding applications being put out there for jazz musicians and other areas in which there's more of a lineage of getting funding to go and do tours and projects. Like, for example, in my own experience, I only went for funding because my guitarist in my band, who is a jazz musician, was like, you should apply for funding. And then with his overview and feedback, I got that. But if it wasn't for him encouraging me, I would have been like, what's the point? Because I don't feel seen by some of the organisations in that regard.
Thanks. Yeah. Jonas?
Yeah, well, I think like optimistic is a strong word, but if one good thing happened in COVID, it was like at least some like democratisation of access to funding, and thinking in particular like outside of the like big institutions that have been funded for the last 1,000 years or whatever. Like, but my background is in club music and like jungle and drum and bass and techno, and nightclubs and promoters working in that world, they were not getting Arts Council funding. But like they just about can now if they get the right angle. And like, yeah, like I recently did an application with like a pretty prominent jungle and garage promoter and got some money, and that probably wouldn't have happened before COVID. Like, so yeah, there's at least a surface level move to recognise like real music where it's happened, and British music heritage beyond the institutions.
Thanks. Yeah. Mary Claire, how optimistic are you feeling?
Mixed again, I think. So I think from my perspective, if we're looking at kind of local government support for culture, against a backdrop of austerity, it's been incredibly difficult. Like, I've been in conversations with council leaders, and they're saying, okay, well, what do we fund here? Do we fund culture, or do we fund a rape crisis centre? You know, and it's one or the other. And those really, really difficult conversations and decisions have to be made. And you know, you try and go around it in a kind of, let's not take that binary view, like, you know, bread and roses. We need a bit of everything. So, you know, is the public sector going to be better financed? I would like to think that, you know, with a change in government, there might be, but I don't think there's going to be a huge shift. I think in terms of positive, yeah, so there's a real concern there about over the last 15 years, you know, standstill or reducing funding. And I think that all like reserves, both individuals are tired of the constant fight. Reserves organisationally, lots of kind of gaps in things that just aren't being kept on top of. I think, you know, they will come to a head, and so I do have concerns there. Positivity, let's have some positivity. In Greater Manchester, I think we're in an okay position. I think we're in a better position than some other places in the country, and I don't particularly like pitting places against each other. I don't think that's the thing, but I think we have leaders in Greater Manchester who do get culture increasingly, who see it as vital to who we are, health and well-being benefits, like economic benefits. Like, I think those arguments are heard, and I think, you know, in Greater Manchester, we've been able to increase investment in GMCA. We've doubled it in the last 6 years. So where you've had these, you know, councils having to make really difficult decisions and cut funding completely or reduce funding, in Greater Manchester we've seen it increasing, and I think it's on us and kind of my team to make sure that that additional funding gets to the people who haven't accessed it before. It's not just kind of topping up the usual, so the diversifying the ways in which we fund. So, you know, you spoke about the Inspire Fund. That's a really quick turnaround, 500 to 2,000 quid. You can buy equipment, you know, if you need some new decks, if you need a flute, you can buy that. You know, it doesn't have to be a big project. So I think there is positivity against a national backdrop of misery. There we go.
Thanks. And finally, on this question, Linda, I mean, Manchester Collective have been incredibly successful in bucking the trend, you might say, in terms of the way that classical music has been funded. I mean, are you feeling positive? Are you feeling optimistic?
I feel optimistic about the changes and, like you said, the democratisation of funding in this country, although let's not forget we've got a really long way to go. I mean, we're still getting a very small percentage of the arts and culture funding relative to London and even the Midlands. I think that I'm optimistic that people find creative solutions to issues, and I think that is starting to happen. I think anybody that thinks they can take their foot off the gas in terms of searching for different ways to get funding will fall off the edge quite quickly. We were lucky to get national portfolio status this time round with the Arts Council, but it covers a fraction of it covers a fraction of our costs, and I've certainly noticed as a experienced grant writer that the trust and foundation grants that are coming in for arts and culture have just really sort of, the competition for them is intense, and I think that funders are under pressure to address systemic change in this country at the moment. I think as artists and cultural organisations we could quite often go to funders for projects or for festivals or for very specific things, where I've noticed a trend that funders are actually coming together to try and give bigger sums to address systemic issues. So it's harder to get project funds. I have to say that it's something that we think about and talk about all the time as an organisation and with our board of trustees, and certainly looking for ways in which we can pivot away from a dependency on public funding, because I just think even with a new government it's not going to change substantially. I mean, I have to say that we are based in Manchester, and Manchester is in our name. You know, our group is on tour in America at the moment, and we've got a residency at the South Bank Centre in London. We get no funding from the city or from Greater Manchester. So we are having to address this problem by raising our profile in London and Bristol and where the money is, as a way of trying to sort of leverage funds, which is quite controversial, but it's just, I mean, partly that's just a pragmatic thing, yeah.
Thanks, Linda. What's emerged, I think, from this first question is that firstly, it's a very mixed picture, and there is a certain amount of shifting, you might say, of money from one place to another place. Particularly, you were saying, Jonas, in terms of, say, money being able to fund the kind of music that you're in. I wonder if we could think about this from the point of view of the artist. And Jay, you made a very interesting point about who artists are and what it's like to apply for these things. And on the other hand, organisations like Manchester Collective have benefited from the skills that, Linda, you've had as a fundraiser, a professional fundraiser. So could we just turn to you, Jay, and dig a little deeper into what it's actually like to sort of put a funding bid together as an artist? What are the barriers?
It's so long, like so long. So we did Developing Your Creative Practice for Arts Council. I can't remember what the word count was of the total application, but it was quite a lengthy process. It involves you doing a budget. So if you're an artist and you're at a certain stage in your career where you've not toured yet, you've probably never done a budget before. I don't think there's a lot of guidance out there to help them with that, or if it is, it's very literary, it's written. So again, it's very hard to engage with when you're trying to express yourself via that platform. So it was long. It was also trying to encapsulate your idea in a short format as well. Like I think one of the initial asks was to break down my project into like 100 words, and when you're just literally got the whole world at your feet, it's very hard to do. I almost feel like with the funding process there needs to be a bit more hand-holding with it for artists to make it more accessible. It's great having these pots of funds, and it's great saying that we can fund all of these different voices and communities, but if you're not leading these communities to the funds by assisting them, then you're just saying it's there but not opening the door to make it accessible for them. It's counterintuitive.
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard even as a professional fundraiser. I mean, they're a nightmare, those applications. Yeah.
And Jonas, what was your experience of going for that, for funding?
My first experience as like a young and stupid promoter who thought he could give this a go was hard. But like we got it, and then I got a lot of practice and I got a lot of support over the years from Jeremy Davies at MusicNet through a kind of training program they did for grassroots music venues to basically get their acts together, because they're all messes. This was during COVID. And I think going back to what you were saying about the accessibility, like this is something like the Arts Council is getting a bit better at this, at least. Like they have. And this is the problem though, they don't advertise it very well and they've not got enough, but they have like access officers that can help and like do actually like pretty significant, like someone I know had weekly meetings with this access officer for 3 or 4 weeks doing a project grant, and like you've just got to ask and it's free. And it's there, but they don't advertise it enough.
You've got to know it's there.
Yeah, and they don't advertise who it's for enough as well. So some people see like access and think like, oh, like this has to be like a disability thing or neurodivergence or whatever, but like actually it's there for anyone who wants it or anyone who needs it. But then again, the Arts Council doesn't have enough people to do that. They don't advertise it enough, probably because they don't have enough people to do it. But again, slowly, potentially getting better, but then the money at the other end isn't getting bigger, so who knows?
Ollie, you're pretty experienced applying for funding. How would you advise artists to go about it?
Well, I think like the really hard thing, like what we're all saying here, is having to do it again and again and again, and the feeling of constantly being on a treadmill. And I got to a point where I was just like sick of having to sing from a supper the whole time. And I think like one thing that's really missing with funding is making it sustainable. You know, if someone's worth supporting, then properly support them. And I was in a position with one enterprise where I'd like got funding from all the places that you could, and then they're all like, hey, we've helped you already, we can't help you again. And you're like, oh well, where do I go now? So the experience overall with funding is frustrating. And I think like something else is the sorry, I'm just moaning tonight basically. I think like another thing that I've not mentioned is the reporting as well, which can often like get in the way when you're launching like a new year of an enterprise or whatever, like then having to sit down and do like loads of paperwork and data and stuff like that is also difficult. And it's not easy for everybody to be able to do that. So it's one of frustration really, but one that I continue to engage in. So
a national portfolio organisation as you are now, I mean that only lasts for 3 years, doesn't it? Or is it? Or how long is it?
It's for 3 years. We've got an extra year in this cycle that we've been given that we'll have to apply for, but it won't be a kind of open competition. Yeah, I mean, it is exhausting. And the thing about when you're applying for funders is this sense of something new and the pressure that you're, I guess Manchester Collective is a young organisation, so we've benefited in the last few years of being new, having funding to help ourselves start up. We were quite, quickly able to evidence impact, so that helped. But, we know that's not going to last forever. And so it's that constant thing of where is the next, looking sort of 1 or 2 years ahead and thinking where's the next source of funding going to come from? I mean, the other thing is I feel that we are just being pushed towards the American philanthropy model in the UK, which we're not ready for because we don't have that culture, and especially not in a city like ours, where there's just a lot of demands for people's generosity. And as you said, if you're choosing between having to give to your local arts organisation or you know, a local food bank or whatever, that's quite troubling, because I just don't see how we can have that as a sustainable funding stream, really.
I think we're very lucky to be here in Manchester. It's really interesting to hear your experience, actually, but I think we're really lucky to be here in Manchester, to have, just from an event perspective, to have local authorities that are supportive and behind our culture here. You know, this GMCA fund that they've done, and there's a few different levels of it to come out yet, is really fantastic. And you know, all the councils are really behind it, and I feel like really privileged to be here in Manchester, because it's not like that everywhere.
No. Mary Claire, could you say something about, you know, what is available for grassroots venues, for
Yep.
young artists?
Yeah, so I'm going to go into I've got to list them off in a really, really dull way. So there's kind of two strands of it that are 3-year funding, so your kind of portfolio funding. We've got 40 organisations that we fund across Greater Manchester, balance of art form, geography, diversity, all of those things. Then we've got the fund underneath, which is Inspire, and we've got 5 rounds every few months, between £500 and £2,000 that I spoke about, and that's like really, I think it's 1 page that you have to fill in. We're not expecting kind of reporting back. It's we trust artists, like you know. But again, like, I think we went out our first round, we had 400 applications, like, and it is a kind of limited pot. And I think, you know, when I was doing the misery stuff there, the joy is that there are 400 who applied, brilliant creatives. And I think that there's some, you know, we can get very caught up in funding, but creatives are doing amazing stuff without funding. And I think they will always do amazing things without funding, and they will find ways. And if you think of any of the kind of stars of Manchester, Greater Manchester, like, I don't think any of them would say, I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for this city council, or, you know, they creatives will find a way to be creative. Now, there is a thing that is kind of incumbent on us to do, which is to try and address those kind of systemic barriers. I think the class thing, you know, we see that there is a particular type of person who is able to progress because they have outside means, you know, and so I think there's systemic issues, but I have genuine faith that creatives, regardless of funding, will find a way to do brilliant things. And I don't think that means that there isn't a responsibility, but yeah.
Is that reassuring in any way to...
Yeah, I think for me, it's about also ensuring that people know it's there. Like I kind of hinted at before, I've made music for quite a long time, and it was only in the recent 2 years that I even considered it, because I saw so many other artists who look like me, who are from where I'm from, who are like, this just isn't a thing for us. Like, there are these bodies, like, apart from Brighter Sounds have done a lot within the space, particularly for hip hop and black music. It's very, very cool to see. So I feel like there needs to be a bigger piece around ensuring that all of these genres feel like they're included within the funding scape, because I feel like sometimes that's missed in the conversation.
Just generally, if I can ask an awkward question, which is that if you look at Arts Council England, which you know, obviously it is only a minor funder of the kind of music that we're generally talking about, Arts Council's music budget, I believe about 80% goes on classical music and opera. Is there a shift going on in funding, a rebalancing, you might say? And how does that intersect with, say, GMCA's view on it?
It's incredibly tricky. Like, I think, you know, opera and classical are really, really, really expensive. I think that, and you know, I'm not going to talk personal views. I think that there is a balance that we try to get between not kind of destroying a very a venerable institution that has produced a thing for hundreds and hundreds of years. But these venerable institutions are really, really expensive. And, you know, and I think that we have to work with those institutions to make sure that they realise their responsibility in terms of kind of relevance. Like, I think there's things around training and, you know, what is their responsibility to Greater Manchester with all of that money? And it's not just concerts. What else are they doing in terms of supporting the kind of music ecology? You know, it's really difficult. It is a really difficult question, and I think those particular bits of the art form are not going to get cheaper.
Could I? Sorry.
Yeah, so Linda and then you, Jonas.
Go on.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I obviously am in the classical music world, although we're very reluctantly in the classical. I mean, we're sort of, you know, but no, we are in it, and it costs millions to run a symphony orchestra, and that makes us cross as well as a kind of classical music organisation that's wanting to move this art form on, because we say classical music and like what does that mean? It just refers to actually a specific period in history. We're just talking about musicians and who have gone through a kind of particular training pathway, but we're interested in doing other things with that art form. So it's frustrating to me to hear the resistance, and also I think when those organisations are talking about the feeling penalised, and I can sort of understand it, but I'm not particularly sympathetic, because I also feel that they can leverage other kinds of funds within their community of people that go to those concerts. So it is a complex. We were just talking about this before the live stream. It's very complex, and change is not easy. But I mean, I feel like that is a change that does need to happen.
Jonas?
Yeah, I think. Nah, it's cool.
Come on, say what you think.
It's fine.
No, I was just thinking on this based on what you were saying, and I think this is what Manchester Collective and organisations like that do is great, because it shows like where this music can be meaningful again and can be relevant again, and it seems incredibly unfair to the grassroots music sector that there is not the same commercial pressure on these institutions that there are on a music venue. Like when you go to like a big hall, all the tickets they've sold are something like 10% of the total price to put on the show. The rest is funded. That is outrageous. Like it just is. And you know, it's not necessarily because their musicians are getting paid really well, because they're usually not. Like, so there needs to be like some actual conversation with some of those big institutions, like about, well, their internal financial structures and who's getting paid six figures for swanning about going to dinners. And
Keep going.
I'm Jonas Roberts, independent person. And to make sure that their work is like remaining accessible and relevant, because like they've all got audience members who've left them money in their will, but that will run out eventually. Like, and then what? Like, it's in their own interests to like remain relevant, and you don't really see that work being done. And when you see it being done, it's often not done particularly well, because there's no trust given to exciting and emerging people like Manchester Collective give trust in exciting and emerging people to actually like do different things and like take what they see as risks when they're less risky than what they're doing.
I think it is happening in the regions, and I think there are orchestras that are really trying to like look at CBS, City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, and they've just opened a state school that they are running the music all the way through every aspect. So there are orchestras that are taking that seriously. We've got a great symphony orchestra in this city that we should be proud of, but we're right to put as you said so well, to remind them of their responsibility to the city. So, yeah.
I guess we're talking about, we have talked a little bit about classical music because that's where the money is, in a sense. But in general, what is it, from the point of view of a funder, Marie-Claire, what is it, what's in it for the funder?
In terms of investing in music?
Yeah.
I mean, this, like, I make this case every day. I can kind of rattle it off. But I have different versions that I say to different people. So, you know, amongst the 10 leaders of Greater Manchester, I know that there will be some who are more interested in the kind of visitor economy and the international reputation. I know that that might not be the same of some of our other local authorities who actually have got a real kind of strength in well-being and the you know, the work around kind of dementia or around mental health. I know that some are around, you know, really benefit from festivals and, you know, young people. And there's, I think there's so many arguments of why a funder would fund music. It's just choosing the right one for your right audience. I think, yeah, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you fund music?
Yeah. I'm turning to you, Ollie. We seem to be in a situation where you could make an accusation that all of the problems that have occurred because of the arts, sort of an arts funding concentrating on a single city, which you know London was. Are we not in danger of replicating that situation in Manchester?
I think there's loads of other reasons why we're in danger of replicating the situation down in London, in Manchester, but funding is perhaps not one of them. And I'll just make the assertion that the funding shouldn't even exist, that we shouldn't be sat here having this conversation, that there should be a redistribution of wealth and power within the music industry that includes some support for the grassroots, and we shouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. Funding, for me, feels like charity for the music and culture sectors. When artists and their management companies and labels are enriched, great things happen. A really good example is NQ over in East Manchester, and what ADEX has done there with the empire that they've built. They've bought a building there, they've reinvested back into Manchester. They're now employing kids from Manchester, making things happen. They're now signing local artists and investing in local artists. We need a wholesale change of the music industry and entire cultural sector, which I'm glad to say is happening at the moment. But you know, hopefully in 3 or 4 years' time, this conversation will be redundant.
So you think that the music industry, basically, in your view, ought to be self-sustaining, that there ought to be like the football leagues, you know, supporting grassroots football.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, we're seeing like a hot topic at the moment with the new arena opening in town and the refurb of A Arena and Factory International opening. You know, we've heard a lot, and at the same time, the Troubles at Night and Day have been through. We've heard a lot of different viewpoints on the need for the big venues to be supporting the little venues. Well, it goes beyond the live sector, it goes to the whole of the recorded music industry. Record labels, publishing companies should be putting back into the grassroots, but the model is very broken at the moment, and it's very sad that we have to sit here wasting our time talking about this and then going home and wasting our time. It's not wasting our time, hey, we're going to get some money for it, but filling forms out when we should be doing what we're put on this earth to do.
Yeah. Jay, does it bother you what the source of the money is? Would it be better for you as an artist if it was coming from, as Ollie was saying, the industry itself?
I think so, because there's more of an understanding of the way in which you communicate and also what you're going to do with it. I think it's hard sometimes trying to articulate a project to someone who may not be in your world or be from where you're from or get your creative vision. I think musically, generally, a lot of the people who are in the industry or in the creative arts industry, we're a tribe, we have our own ways of communicating, and I think sometimes that can be lost with some of the funding bodies.
I think we need it breaking down on a more local level, a more accessible level. That's why, you know, the GMCA fund is great that you're doing that, you know, and making it more accessible for the local scene. So
we talked a little bit earlier on about how there was a sort of responsibility for artists who receive public funding to contribute to the community, if we can put it that way. And I mean, if I can turn to Linda, I mean, to what extent is arts funding, or should it be, dependent on what used to be called, I know it's not called this anymore, but education and outreach, for example? Is the purpose to produce artists? Is it to create a thriving nighttime economy, as it might be from the GMCA's point of view, or is it to promote well-being in people and communities and participants?
To be honest, I don't think there's one answer to that, and that's not me being on the fence. I just think it depends what kind of an organisation you are. I think the problem comes when you feel like you can't be the organisation that you really need to be because you've got to do something else in order to get the money. So for example, I guess Manchester Collective burst out of this sense of frustration with the status quo, and it really was, we just passionately want to play different music to the music that we're being told to play, and we don't want to play it in a concert hall, and we don't want to sit there all in black and you're over there and we're over here. So really we just needed to do that. That was what we were put on this earth to do, and then commissioning new work became part of that, and then collaboration became part of that, because it was just driven by a creativity. Now, where it goes wrong is when we're sitting as a team thinking, oh shit, we need to, we're not doing any learning and participation, and so how are we going to get Arts Council funding if we're not doing that? But actually we're really bad at doing that. We don't know what we're doing, we're not educators, and so that is quite uncomfortable, and it's been quite a journey for us to try and work out how we can give something back, because we sort of felt like actually the best thing we can do to give back is to give audiences a really good experience that sort of is life-changing. They leave the end of the evening different to the way that they came in at the beginning. I do think that there's pressure on us as artists and cultural organisations to try and reverse this disastrous onslaught on schooling, and I've now raised 2 kids who have left school and did no music throughout their state schooling. So yeah, I think we shouldn't be, like you say, what are we here to do? It's just not to sort of fill the gaps in an education policy, so that's certainly a thing.
And Jonas, you are kind of, Brighter Sound is educational, broadly speaking.
Better than schools, though, I promise.
Yeah, but in those terms, you presumably raise your money on the basis that you are creating a new generation of artists and opening doors and so on.
Yeah, I think, but so. Okay, right, sorry, just a thought that was in my head after you were speaking is that, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find artists that don't do education and outreach to one extent or another. Artists, for the most part, are social within communities. They're helping each other, they're mentoring each other when it's not kind of codified or formalised. That happens, that's how music develops. So I think the kind of education and outreach, and at least from my perspective with the Emerging Artists programme, is less about a kind of education and just providing space for experimentation and providing space for artists to meet each other and learn from each other and learn with each other, and also just have a good time, remain playful, because it's all stressful, and especially if you've got to write funding applications and that, and post on Instagram all the time, it's well stressful. So giving, I think a big and the most important work that we do is when we can give artists low stakes space to be playful and be together and be social and be silly, and you create that space, and at the end of it suddenly the most amazing music's come out of it, and you didn't even ask them to do that. Do you know what I mean? So I think I don't even know if that answers your question. I don't even remember your question.
It is a good point. I mean, it's like, what is the function of artists? And like you say, part of just built into our function is that we create something that gives back socially.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why art exists, right? It has a social function, but I just think it's wrong if as an artist you feel like you're having to produce something that is not original. It's not coming from
And
you know.
I think on that as well, we're talking about funding, but the conversation could be about investment or support. And so not necessarily, you know, like one of the things that we hear an awful lot is about access to space. And I think if we're looking at those barriers at which artists are priced out, sometimes it's not about needing the cash, it's about needing the space, it's about needing equipment, it's about, you know, transport things. So how do, you know, alongside funding, or, you know, if we don't think that funding, you know, that is the holy grail, like how can investment make things easier for creatives to create is a very important part of the picture that I think, you know, that we're very kind of cognizant of. We've got our funding pots, but we've also got strategic investment where we can just go, okay, and we'll do that and we'll help these people with this space here. And that's, you know, and I think that it's not always like giving of a grant. It's also making sure that a space is saved, or making sure that a council knows this thing, or making sure that there's equipment, or that you can put creatives together. That's equally important.
And some people have argued that, you know, the great sort of upswing in the Manchester music scene came because there was a lot of cheap space available, and there was a relatively lenient kind of unemployment benefit regime. So basically you could be on the dole and you could hire a cheap space in a knackered old mill or warehouse somewhere and make some music. I mean, the economic benefits of that the cultural sphere has brought to Manchester, ironically, couldn't we argue that actually it's priced artists out of the market? I mean, do you have enough space, or Jay, do you feel that pressure?
Sometimes, particularly like with rehearsals for live shows, it's quite difficult trying to find spaces. I mean, Pirate people use, but again, that's a monopoly on a problem. So a lot of artists that I know tend to have student musicians in there, because then obviously if they're a student, you can use the spaces and facilities of the university as a way to get around that.
Yeah.
But if there was more affordable space, then we wouldn't have this issue.
Yeah. What's your take on this, Ali? Do you think that the city's is too expensive to do art in now?
Well, I know it is. I think it's a fact, and you know, I know a few artists that do really well and have great blossoming careers, and they also have a day job and a night job. And compare, like, you know, you were referencing back in how it was in the 80s when space was plentiful and really cheap. And I don't know what the name of it there was a special like dole back then where you could get it whilst you made your album or whatever, and it's a completely different market now, isn't it? And you know, artists just can't even afford to live at the moment, let alone like record and make an album. And I think that's amplified by, you know, going back to the music industry again, you're either like a super like millionaire or you're nothing. You're right at the bottom of the pile. There's no middle ground at the moment for artists to like build any kind of sustainable, stable life on. And that's even harder in a place like Manchester, where you're in one of like the property hotspots in the world. So it's really tough at the moment, and space is a big issue here. You know, keep losing rehearsal rooms. Brunswick Mill went recently, didn't it?
So how are we going to persuade people like Spotify to invest in the grassroots? And what are we going to do to make sure that money goes into the grassroots instead of into the pockets of their shareholders?
I mean, you'd have to get them to pay artists fairly first.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so you can't basically, because even if they wanted to change, they wouldn't be able to. So unfortunately, they will just become irrelevant.
That's pretty bleak.
What? Spotify being irrelevant? I think that's a great future. That's not a bleak future.
No, I think I think we were talking earlier about kind of value, and I think there is something wrong with the way in which we value music. I think the idea, streaming has disrupted, but it has also disrupted notions of how much you should pay for something. And I think that until we reset that sense of value and what something is worth, and that direct relationship between artist and audience, I think it's incredibly difficult. I think there's different, you look at most artists now, they make albums because they want to, but they tour to make the money. But then also an awful lot of artists that I speak to, they don't want these big mega deals where they're tied in for like 100 years and they've got to do 5 albums. They want like 35k a year, and they want to be able to like do music. And I think, we've not spoken about like universal basic income for artists, but I think there is all of those kind of like, how do we shift notions of value and what we value as a society and what we're prepared to pay for it? Because like, as we were discussing with austerity and all, that pot isn't growing. How do we reconfigure what is there?
Linda, I think the first time I heard the Manchester Collective, they were in Islington Mill. I think that might actually have been the first gig.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
But there were 2 people in the room or something.
Yeah. Well, I'm quite large, so it was all right. But in one way, I mean, Salford, the relationship between Salford and Manchester is interesting because, that first space that Manchester Collective were exploring, and you have explored very interesting spaces throughout the region, was there because it's not Manchester, you might say, to a certain extent. How do you feel about the spaces that
Well, it's really interesting because I guess for us, space is that's been the leveller, and I think that's why it's interesting to hear about space, because that was a radical choice for us. We didn't play at the Oglesby, or Stoller Hall. We played at the White Hotel or whatever, and so it is. Space is political. And in some ways, I guess that we've kind of grown. I mean, we're not wealthy, or we're still hand to mouth, even though kind of outwardly we're enjoying success. But we sort of almost missed those early days of being forced to play in a grassroots space. Now it's like, okay, we can get bigger venues, and we need that income, and we're having to go to London and to the South Bank Centre and having to go to Europe, because we can't insist on paying our artists and staff fairly and earn no money. So but space is really important, and I hope certainly as long as I'm involved in the organisation, that although we are going into other spaces, we still remember the grassroots spaces, because you get a completely different vibe, you have a different experience, and it's really essential that the grassroots energy is what makes arts and culture, I'd say. It's sort of just, it comes up, and you can't think that you'll just arrive at the top without that growth at the bottom. Well,
Thanks very much. I'm going to ask one more question of everybody, which is, if you had to make one change to the situation for funding artists, what would it be? And it doesn't matter how much it costs. I mean, well, no, it does matter how much it costs, because you could just say, well, we'll just throw 10 million quid at the problem. But let's say that it's a structural change. Ollie.
A structural change?
Yeah.
My God, okay. A structural change to the funding industry. I'm just going to say more money, faster.
Okay. Jay?
Trying to think. I guess. Can you come back to me on that one?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
I don't know if this entirely answers the question, but I think venues and promoters need more money, because promoters are always the last to get paid, at least the grassroots middle-level touring ones. Venues are knackered at the minute, and without them, artists ain't getting paid nothing neither.
Claire?
I'd tackle the old music education. I think like genuine space for play and creativity and all of that within music education, because I think that the amount of amazing talent that we lose just because they don't believe it's for them, and I think that a genuine overhaul of creative education, that's going to cost, like cost though. Are we all right with that?
This fantasy football here. So
Cut the check.
Linda?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree definitely with education. I think like to deny a young person creativity and play and space is just criminal. And I also think that then relates to value. And the big problem that we have is that if we're not talking about the value of art and culture, or then we're going to be in this perpetual cycle of not having enough money. I mean, and the values related to responsibility. I mean, I'd love to see if for businesses or making a lot of commercial money in this city, that they almost have to pay like a culture tax or something, so that money is going back into the
Tourist
arts
tax?
and culture.
Do we
I
have a
don't know.
tourist
We've
tax?
got the
It's some kind of
hotel tax now, haven't we?
redistribution.
I think the hotel tax was brought in, and they've just published the first year's. It made significant. I think it's all available on. If you Google it, you can find out where the money's going.
But I think the more money fast is really important, because I think that we're going to lose. I mean, you mentioned SAFA gone. We're going to lose in the next few years really good arts organisations, and it's like we're just sort of sleepwalking into that, I think.
Jay, a last word?
So I'd say make it accessible in terms of the way in which people apply, so that people can bring their authentic self to it. I'd say representation of genres, as we've heard. Classical music's great, but there's a lot of funding attached to that and not so much for other genres. We need to have a look at that. And I'd also ensure that the people at the top who are making the decisions about funding are representative of the wider scale of the city as well. So not people from certain backgrounds, but have everybody represented within those panels.
Thanks
Those are my
very
three
much.
things.
Excellent. So, Ollie, Jay, Jonas, Marie-Claire, Linda, thank you very much for your thoughts on this issue. And we're going to wrap up now. We've given it a thorough airing. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
questions for
Right.
the audience. Yeah, we've got those. Yeah, we've got some. Yeah. So, do we have any questions from the audience? Yeah, there's one question over there.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for this.
So we need to get the microphone over there. We'll cut this bit. No,
Thank you
not your
so
question.
Ready to go now?
Yeah, you're ready to go now.
Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate the insight. I'm an artist myself, but I've also started, because of a lot of the stuff that I've seen, I've started my own not-for-profit organisation to try and be part of this solution to help with resources and adding that. I'm kind of new to Manchester, so I'm just coming in. My question is, there's a lot of conversations, and my question is, does conversations like this, and you're talking the ideas and getting these amazing minds and accessible resources together, where does that end up? Because I've been part of so many seminars, talks for years and years and years of professionals. Where does that end up, and where does the change happen? Where can we follow up and see, oh, that conversation I went to at Low 4, what was the results of that? Because it's tough to see where this ends up.
Oh, tough question. Who wants to answer that?
I mean, I'm
you,
happy
isn't
to
it?
sort of,
Yeah, Linda.
I mean, I would say that I totally empathise with that frustration, and nobody wants to just be in a perpetual talking shop. I think change is slow, cultural change is slow, and I think that every generation and every group, although it may feel like we're having the same conversation, things are changing, chipping away. So I don't think we should feel too dispirited by the length of time, that it does take to create change. But yeah, I've got no kind of solution, only empathy, other than we just have to be accountable. So I guess if you are an artist and you're interested in that, then ask the questions about what's changed. And
Yeah, we're trying at Beyond the Music. We're incorporated as a cooperative, so we're democratically controlled and collectively owned by the members of our conference, because we don't just want to be a talking shop. You know, we're using the cooperative structure to bring people together in the music business that might not usually speak together around core issues that affect all of us, you know, green and sustainability, through to like mental health, through to grassroots venues as well. And we did our first event last October. You're very welcome to the one this October, and we've got a few cooperative working groups with some amazing people that have come together to actually like work solutions, and it's working and it's happening so far. So we're trying, but it's cooperative is a good way to do that, I would say.
Don't have the answer.
No, I mean, I think you're right to hold this group, us all collectively, to account in a sense, and that's part of it. You know, you come to the city, and welcome, by the way, best city in the world, and you become a part of the city, and then you become part of that conversation, and part of the conversation is holding the people who, you know, are already here to account. So yeah, keep doing it. More questions from the audience? Yeah, please.
I think I'd just like to echo what Jonas said about, as a promoter, venues and promoters. Yeah, without them, you know, artists. I mean, you've got a situation where you've got bands, 30 years old bands, that are playing the Co-op Arena, and for price of one ticket is essentially what a promoter will pay an artist to pay 100 capacity venue. Picking up on Alan's point, is again a massive redistribution of wealth. I think it applies, you know, socially anyway, but certainly within the music industry, it's all at the wrong end. I mean, you know, the classical music, 8% of the funding going into classical music, yeah, that needs changing, but it's just the money that's being made by, you know, again, artists selling off their back catalogue for £300 million. It's just obscene, you know, and that's stuff that was made 30, 40 years ago. The model is completely and utterly broken and doesn't work. And one day we will have no artists left. Where they're going to come from?
Yeah, you'll find that with 150-year-old business models, which is what the recording industry is. And, you know, thankfully, we're finally seeing what's going to unpick all that, which is, you know, blockchain-based technologies and Web3. The effect that's going to have on music is massive in terms of redistributing wealth and power. So thank God we're at a turning point for it. But, you know, we're late-stage capitalism at the moment, I'm afraid. Sorry, late-stage Victorian capitalism.
Yeah. Any other questions from the floor, from the audience? Okay, nothing. I think then we can close proceedings, and thank you everybody for coming. Thanks for the panel once again for being part of the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, I'm parched.